Welcome to the Heavenly Treasury broadcast, where we help believers achieve God's financial abundance for your life. Today we are going to continue part 3 of our Heavenly Spending series, where we talk about how to spend money the Lord's way and to help and what that's going to look like when you get into God's financial flow, which is very, very different than the world teaches you, and it's even more different than some believers are teaching you. Because again, there's a lot of the things that some believers that are finance experts per se are teaching you to do some things with your money in terms of spending. Okay, that's the way they work. But is it really the way God wants you to do it? And if you are really going to be on fire for the Lord and do what He wants you to do and fulfill His calling on your life, is that the way you're supposed to do it? That's what we're exploring in this series. And today we're going to be talking about something very, very interesting and special. And we will get to the topic in a very short minute. But I can guarantee you it's going to be one you're going to like. That I promise you. I really like preparing for this more than just about as much as any other broadcast that I've done. But I mean, it stinks that I'm not doing this live where I could get some interaction with you guys. But again, it is what it is. I'm on a trip next week, and for now, this is being pre-recorded. So we're gonna just focus again on our key scripture for this Heavenly Spending series, chapter 10 from Hosea. It's right here. All right. Israel is a degenerate vine. He brings forth fruit for himself. As his fruit increased, he increased the altars. And the better his land, the better they made the pillars. Their heart has been slippery, now they are guilty. He breaks down their altars, he destroys their pillars. Okay, what does that mean? As Israel's fruit increased, meaning their increase of economics and finances, they increased their altars, meaning their idols. And the more he bettered the God blessed their land, the more they created those idols and those pillars. Okay, and so again, God did not like the way they were spending their money, so to speak, in biblical times, so he destroyed their idols. And everything that they spent money on was just basically destroyed. Okay, that's kind of the focus that we're going to be on today, is how we really want to spend money. Because again, God does care about how you spend your money. He does. All right, even if it doesn't say specifically in the Bible, hey, this is your step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and all the way when it comes to spending your money. All right, there is a little bit of free will, but there are some key concepts that we're going to talk about, okay? And today we're going to be talking about your very, very favorite thing to spend your money on, and that's taxes, okay? We're going to be talking about taxes and what the Bible says today. Now, if you've seen this broadcast before, I've said plenty of times, I stay away from politics. I do. I don't care. None of it benefits me. None of it hurts me. None of it hinders my calling in any way, shape, or form, whatever they're doing in Washington, D.C., or even my state government, okay? Doesn't really matter to me, and that's why I really don't want to talk about that. Again, on Twitch, you're going to see plenty of channels talking about politics and their point of view. You can go to that echo chamber and just listen to that all day long. That's fine, okay? If it's entertaining for you, so be it. But I really don't want it to be a distraction from you, which is why I don't talk about it here, because nothing in the Bible will be stopped by anybody making a law, okay? If every person in DC wrote a law against you saying you're not allowed to do something, but God says you can, guess what you can do? You can do what God says, and His laws will override every single legislator in every single government that's from here to kingdom come. Okay, so that's really why I stay out of this. Okay, so from a biblical and scriptural point of view, what does it mean about taxes? Okay, well, let's start with this. Why do we have governments in the first place? All right, again, putting political opinions aside, just about everybody here, if you're watching this, will disagree in some way, shape, or form with something the government spends money on. You will also agree with something that the government spends money on, okay? I guarantee you, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, there is some government part that you're going to agree with, and at least one that you're going to disagree with. So again, why do we really have that? And it really comes down to one fundamental factor: to keep the established order. That's why we have governments, to keep the established order. All right, let's just think about your household, however many are in there, assuming it's more than one, because if you're the only one in there, you are the governing authority. You're the president, you're the CEO, you're the senator, you're the congressman, you're all of them, and you write the laws and you do what you want. But when there's more than one of you, it takes a little bit of order, per se. And again, even when it comes to the family structure, God is very clear about the order of the husband, then the wife under him, and then the kids under her. Okay, and that's the way the order is established with your family. And again, God is a God of order. He doesn't want anybody just doing anything they want. He wants you do have free will, but when it comes to him, there are certain things that he wants you to do with your life, even under the umbrella of something else, like a government or a family. Okay, so think about this. What kind of rules do you have in your household? Just think about that for a second. Assuming it's more than just you, what kind of rules do you have in your household? Do you let people throw toys through the wall? Do you let people play basketball in your living room? Do you like people playing chess in your bedroom while you're trying to sleep? Okay? Just think about that for a second. You have rules. Not everybody can do anything they want at any time in your household. Otherwise, your house wouldn't exist. It would be burned to the ground. All right? Just think about this. Imagine somebody that you invited over said, you know what? I feel like setting a fire in the middle of your living room because I like fires and it smells nice and I want to roast some marshmallows. What's going to happen? Your house is going to burn down. But if you had rules and an order, you would say, wait, the living room is only allowed to do this, this, and this. All right? Don't do that. Again, you think about that. That's really, really stupid sometimes to think about that somebody would just come into your living room and start a fire. But if you don't have established order in your household, somebody can do that and you wouldn't care. Okay, I don't care how lenient you are as a leader, or strict or lenient. You're going to have some rules in place, some regulations in place in your own household about how people can behave. Now think about a household of 4 people, 6 people. Let's say 8 people, husband and wife, 6 kids, 8 people. There's a significant order that has to happen. Now take America, which has on record 330 million people. At least that's who they count. Okay? 330 million people. You think those 330 million can do anything they want at any time for whatever they please? No. That's why we have a government to help establish an order in theory by the will of the people. Okay? It's not always the will of the people, of course. You know that by now. But in the end, in theory, that's why a government does exist, to establish an order. Okay? Now, every single government in the history of planet Earth has required resources to function. It has, okay? I don't care how small of a town. Even Sparta in ancient Greece required resources to run. They required resources for their army. They required resources for their public officials. All of it, yes. Even small, very independent, very orderly societies still had resources that were required to function. That's why we have taxes. Okay, in some way, shape, or form. Now, those taxes don't always have to apply to its citizens. All right, prior to 1913, we did not have an income tax. And most of the government's funding came from what's called tariffs, where they would put a tax on imported goods coming from other countries. Okay, that did kind of twofold. Again, not saying it was right or wrong, but from the perspective of the people putting the tariffs in place, the number one reason was to get funding for the government. And number 2, it was to protect the economy of America at the time. Because if you make imported goods more expensive, that means the local goods that are made in America are cheaper. And made in America requires a greater economic flow in the land, which helps benefit your citizens. At least in theory, that's why they did it. Okay, so that's how governments were funded. This American government was funded prior to 1913. After that, we had the income tax and so on and so forth. That's what we have today. Okay, so again, the important thing to note is this. Governments keep established order and governments require resources to function. That's where taxes of some sort come in. Okay, now again, it doesn't always have to be income tax. For example, in Jesus' time, the taxes there were not levied on your income. They were levied on your assets. So, for example, if you were a multimillionaire today, but you made no money, you had zero income, you would have zero taxes. Okay, all right. Now you're obviously gonna have sales taxes when you spend the money, gas taxes when you buy gas, and all that sort of thing. But in terms of the income tax, the main way that the government generates its funding, which is through the income tax, Social Security, and Medicare, those 3 things, all those three taxes require an income. So if you were a multimillionaire last year, but you made zero income last year, you would basically pay no taxes. Okay, that's how the American government's tax system is set up. In the Roman tax system, which is where Jesus was, they taxed assets. So for example, if you were a multimillionaire but made no income, you would be taxed heavily. heavily. Okay, that's just how they did it. Every single government and society is very different. Again, we're not going to talk about why things do what they do, but you can kind of use the tax system to incentivize certain behaviors. Now, some of those behaviors you want people to have. For example, Hungary right now has 0 income tax for a family of 4. If you have 4 children in your family, you pay 0 income tax. That's an incentive to get people to have more children. So things like that can incentivize people to do things. It can also incentivize people to avoid things. But again, putting that aside, the most important thing is this: God is a God of order. That's why governments are established, and that's why God didn't tell us, hey, no governments ever. Okay? Now, why is a God of order? Because his word says so. Let's show it here. 1 Corinthians 14:33. Right here. Elohim, by the way, is a generic God. So when you see the word Elohim in this Bible, it means God per se. Okay, so for example, here we go. 14 verse 33. For Elohim is not an Elohim of disorder, but of peace, as in all the assemblies of the set apart ones, meaning the believers. Okay, so he's in this, that Paul is talking about the order of the church, but he's also describing God in a sense. God is not a God of disorder. Okay, that means he is a God of order. If he doesn't like disorder, then he likes order. That's why governments are established. Okay, and that's why taxes exist. Okay, just think about this. All of the rules and regulations in, say, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, even if you've never read those books before and you go in there are a lot of rules. There are a lot of regulations. There are a lot of things that you are required to do as an Israelite. A lot of it. Why? Because God in that first covenant decided to establish the order through rules and regulations. That's him. Even in the New Testament, there are a lot of rules and regulations about how we're supposed to live as believers. We're not supposed to go cheat on our wives. Okay? We're not supposed to go buy a bunch of drugs. We're not supposed to invest in pornography businesses. All that stuff. Okay? Those are rules that, again, God is a God of order. He is. And that's why we have taxes for governments, to have order. Okay? So again, why are we supposed to pay taxes? Okay? Well, here's why. The Bible actually says so, believe it or not. So I want to focus on this particular passage right here, which is Matthew 22, verse 17. Right here. And we're going to start right here. Okay? Then say unto us, this is the Pharisees talking to Jesus. Then say unto us, what do you think? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Caesar being the Roman government. But knowing their wickedness, Jesus said, why do you try me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin of the tax. And they brought him a silver piece. And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to Elohim what is Elohim's. Basically saying, pay your taxes. But wait, it doesn't really say that. Yes, it does. Even 4 chapters before that, 5 chapters before that, in Matthew 17, let's take a look here. This is Jesus talking. But lest we cause them to stumble, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And you shall have opened its mouth, and you shall find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you. Okay? What are they paying that for? 2 verses earlier. He says, yeah. And when he comes into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the sovereigns of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from their strangers? So what is that money paying towards? A tax. Jesus is paying a tax. So again, it's saying from Jesus' perspective, we pay taxes. Okay? So here's where the big question comes in. If we're supposed to pay taxes, why do I have to pay taxes to this government that doesn't represent me at all? Why? Okay, that is the biggest question you get as believers. Even though Jesus says to pay tax, why are we supposed to pay taxes to this government? Okay, you may think, well, it's one thing if we paid taxes to a government that, worshiped God all the time, had believers in it all the time, wasn't corrupt, wasn't just spending money like you wouldn't freaking believe, and all that stuff. Why do we have to pay taxes to this government? All right, so here's ultimately, I'm gonna try to explain this the best that I can. I'm going to go to Romans chapter 13. You've probably heard this before. If you haven't, here it is. It is Romans 13, verse 1. Right here. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God, Whosoever therefore resisteth this power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and that they resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Okay, what does that mean? Being subject to the higher powers. It's talking in Romans chapter 13 about the higher powers of your elected officials, your king, your president, your prime minister, that quote unquote, it says to be quote unquote subjects to them. That's not entirely accurate, because if a government official, if the president came to your house and said, kill your wife, you wouldn't kill your wife. Okay, that's not what that means. Okay, it means basically this. In that verse, it's saying the people in government have been ordained to use the government authority to keep the established order. That's what that verse means. So again, to keep the established order, which is what we talked about, the purpose of government, you have to be paying your taxes. Okay, you do. That's part of it. Okay, to keep the established order. But if you think about it, why have people in the past rebelled? Is that really okay? Because let's say for the moment, enough Americans in some section said, hey, I'm done with this government. I'm done paying taxes to this government. It sucks. It doesn't represent me. What can we do instead? Let's form our own government. Let's form our own society away from this. That is perfectly fine by the Lord's standards, okay? And why the Lord was okay with the American Revolution. Because that's in essence what they did. The 13 colonies wanted to establish their own order away from the order that King George had, okay? And ultimately the Church of England. Those are the two entities that the 13 colonies wanted to break away from. Again, that is perfectly okay by the Lord's standards. And in fact, in our founding documents, it says we're not only okay to do that, but required to do that when the government no longer represents us. Okay? That's one of the reasons in the Declaration of Independence why the 13 colonies rebelled and formed their own country, was for that reason, because the government no longer represented them. Now, there hasn't really been that sort of rebellion per se in today's society, but if there were enough people that got together and said, hey, I don't like this government, I'm not paying taxes anymore to them. We're gonna take you out, and we're gonna go over here. Okay, when I say take you out, I don't mean physically take them out with weapons. I mean let's get rid of them and go over here. Okay, that's perfectly fine. But again, once you establish that new order per se, you now need a new government, and a new government will also require taxes. Okay, so either way, we're not getting around paying taxes, even if the government is perfectly representative of you and all of your beliefs. You are still paying taxes. Even if it represents none of your beliefs, you're still paying taxes. Okay? Because again, God again is a God of order. He also likes people of like minds congregating together. That's why he established nations and borders, to be able to have that. Again, topic for another day. But again, that's one of the reasons why we do pay taxes, to keep that order. Because again, if the governing authority is keeping enough of the people or all of the people from worshiping the Lord in their sense, in their ways, the way that He commanded them to, and the government is stopping you from fulfilling your calling, then guess what? You are obligated to take you and your fellow countrymen to form your own society away from that government. Okay, it doesn't say you have to pay taxes to this government. But you're going to pay taxes to whatever society that you're in. Okay, it doesn't really matter what that society is. If you don't like that society, you can change. You can form your own. But again, you're not getting around the fact that you're going to be paying taxes of some sort. Okay, so in the end, if you don't like your government, it's ultimately the government in the end is a representative of all the peoples. So if you look at today's federal government, it's a representation of all the people that are in our land. So if you see people in Congress just fighting each other, like killing at each other and going after their throats, it's because the people in the land also would go after their throats, each other's. Okay, if the law was allowed to do that. And even sometimes they still do it anyway, even if the law's there. Okay, so that's one of the big reasons why, if you don't like your government, it's ultimately a representative of the people that are there. If you don't like the intelligence of your government officials, representative of the people. Okay, there's a lot. Then you got to start looking at the education system and the quality of the people that are here and all that stuff. Okay, if our leaders, just say for example, if our leaders are always stealing from each other, guess what? That means a lot of the people are probably stealing from each other also. All right, if the leaders openly worship God, and are believers, guess what? It's probably the result of a populace that was also believers and loved God. Okay? Now, again, it's the order that's established by the government. It talks about being able to have laws, and God says in this Romans 13 passage that they have the power to enforce that. But the exception is when the government writes laws that are exception to God's rules. Okay? So if the government says, I'm writing a law that no churches can be built, or no churches can be established, or no churches can congregate together, that's very dichotomous to the Bible. Okay? You're not allowed to do that. And no government is allowed to tell the church you can't meet under any circumstances. All right? Look at COVID. That was a big example. It was quote unquote separating the tares from the wheat, per se. There were a lot of ministries that said, you know what? The Bible tells me to congregate. The Bible tells me to sing praises to the Lord together. The Bible tells me to lay hands on the sick and they will be healed. Anoint their head with oil and they will be healed. It says all that. I'm not going to do what the government says, which is to shut down. I'm going to stay open and continue doing that. I don't care what happens. Every single minister who did that has at least doubled, if not tripled, their ministry by now. Okay, so you can kind of see that was really a separation of, hey, do I really believe Romans 13 and says that I have to do whatever the government says and I have to pay taxes to them, or does it say, hey, the government is keeping me from doing my calling, so I'm not gonna pay attention to them, whatever. Okay, but either way, you're still paying taxes. You're still paying taxes. Now that's a different discussion about governing authorities per se, but the Romans 13 passage says that governing authorities for now have the power to keep that established order. And again, in theory, that's why we're paying taxes. Okay? So the biggest question that I often get when it comes to this topic is, well, by government, putting aside the fact that the government spends money on things that I don't like. All right, if you don't like the wars that are going on across the world that we're funding, okay, that's one thing. Okay, I understand that. But on top of that, putting that aside that you don't like what they're spending on, what if they spend money on ungodly things? What if the government spends money on ungodly things that God says you are not supposed to do, but I'm supposed to pay taxes to a government that's doing things that you don't want us to do? Where is the disconnect? Okay, the biggest example is abortion. All right. Without government subsidies, Planned Parenthood would not exist. Planned Parenthood is ultimately the largest provider of abortions in America. So, I mean, whatever they call it, women's health care, women's choice, all that, it's either way, it's abortion. It's taking a living fetus in a womb and killing it. That's what they're doing, okay? Now, from God's perspective, that fetus is alive because the Bible obviously talks about you're living in your mother's womb at the time for 9 months, and then you're out. Either way, God says, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. And there's plenty of passages, particularly in the New Testament, at the very beginning when Jesus was in the womb, he would jump. Okay, I believe that's the passage. There's a couple passages where the fetus was jumping in there. That means it's live. So if you purposefully kill, especially your own child, that God considers murder. Okay, and that violates one of the 10 commandments. So from God's perspective, abortion is not allowed. Again, putting opinions aside, that's how God views it. All right, so your government funds abortion. So now your choice is basically this. Do I pay no taxes at all, knowing that part of it goes to abortion, or do I pay taxes and to say, you know what, some of it does go to abortion? Here's where you have to ask yourself, if you had only two choices, to pay taxes or not pay taxes, because you don't have the choice of saying, hey, I want this or that, this or that. All right, when you pay taxes, it's not a buffet. You don't get to say, oh, I want money for the Department of Defense, but I don't want any for the Department of Energy. I think they're stupid. You don't get that. It's all or nothing. You get all the buffet or none of the buffet. And some of the buffet tastes terrible. I understand that. But if those are your only two choices, what are you going to do? Let's say for the moment you say, I don't want to pay taxes because some of it goes to abortion. What's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen to abortions in America if government just completely abolished? What do you think is going to happen? Are abortions going to rise or are they going to fall? They're going to rise. How about murders? They're going to rise. How about thefts? They're going to rise. All that stuff is going to rise. How do I know that? Perfect example, San Francisco. Look at what's happened to that city with basically the government stepping aside and letting the citizens do whatever the heck they want, having complete free will. That's what happens when you don't have established order. Thieves run rampant. Okay, murders, thefts, abortions, assaults, chemicals in foods, a lot of the stuff that the government does just completely goes away. All right. So now your question you have to ask yourself is: it sucks to pay taxes and have it fund abortions, but is it better to do that or to not pay taxes at all when abortions would skyrocket? That's what you really have to ask yourself. All right. And here's something else you probably didn't think about. What about Jesus' time? Did the Roman government spend money on anything that was ungodly? The answer is yes. All right. Are you familiar with the Pantheon? It is a famous Roman building. When was that built? It began construction immediately after the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Then it was funded and began construction in 27 BC. Jesus was born in obviously the first AD, lived to 33 years old. During that period of time when he was alive, they were doing construction on the Pantheon. What is the Pantheon? It is a monument and basically an altar to pagan gods. That were funded by Roman tax dollars. Yet in that time, Jesus said, pay your taxes. Okay? So, and just think about this. What is more abominable to God? The second commandment of worshiping idols or the sixth commandment of murder? They're both bad, but which one is worse on God's priority list? Obviously worshiping idols, because it's the second commandment and not the sixth. So, from God's perspective, what is more abominable? Worshipping idols. Yet that's what they did with Roman tax dollars. So you have to understand that even despite that, Jesus said, pay your taxes. Okay? So no matter what we do, we have to pay our taxes. But here's where it gets interesting. What do we do? If the Bible commands us to pay taxes, what do we do? Well, let's start with this. Here's something you probably didn't know. Let me start with this. Political campaigns, as they get closer, every single one of them has some rich person saying, well, just tax me more, tax me more, tax me more. What if I told you there's an option for you to do that? Have you ever thought about that? I want to show you this really quick. I found this. I don't know how I found this, but I want to show you this. It's super funny. Okay? Let's see here. Whoops. Give me one second here. I'm going to pull this up. Apologize about that. So it removed my link. So if we do this, we do this. Okay. All right. Back at it. Look at this. There's a government website where you can gift the money to the government to pay down the debt. Look at this. All right. Seriously. Gifts to reduce the public debt. You can actually give money to pay down the debt. I don't know why you would do that, because you're shooting a BB gun at a freight train. Good luck. I mean, you're using a little pee hole to try and stop a fire hose. We add how many billions a day to the national debt, and you can pay it off. But here's the other thing I found. Somebody actually did it. Look at this. August of this year, $47,515 were donated to the government to pay down the debt. Literally, that's like a second of. We had more to the national debt in 1 second than this. And don't quote me on that, but just think about how ridiculous that is. Somebody donated 48 grand to pay down the national debt. All right. So putting that aside, there's something else you can do. You can also donate straight to the federal government, to the Treasury. You can. So if you ever feel, hey, government, you're not taxing me enough. I love you so much. Here's my money. Okay, because we just talked about you spend money on what you love. I love you, government, so much. Here's more of my money. You can do that right here. Right here. Take a picture of that website. Go to it yourself. You can actually donate to the federal government. Okay? All right. Now, do we do that as believers? No! Don't do that. Okay? Why? Because of stewardship. Okay? You want to be able to steward as much of your economic resources as possible, to be able to have the open door to have more resources as possible. Okay? So biblically speaking, what we are supposed to do is pay the minimum required taxes by law. The minimum required taxes by law. That's what you need to do as a believer. Okay? So it doesn't say pay as much as I tell you to. No, it's your job to do the homework, to have the Holy Spirit tell you, hey, are there ways to reduce my tax bill so that I can have more resources for your kingdom and your honor and your glory and my abundance? Okay, that's nothing wrong with doing that. I have been doing that for years, and I've been given great strategies to be able to do so. Okay, let me just give you some great examples. Okay, obviously, again, stewardship. That's why we want to pay minimum taxes required by law. All right, the key word is by law. Okay, so for example, what I have been doing as a contractor with the contract work that I do is, instead of, because if you're paid a 1099, which means you're a contractor, taxes are not taken out. So what that means is that in theory, you're supposed to pay quarterly to the IRS of an estimation of what you think your tax bill is going to be at the end of the year. When I've done 1099 work, I have not done that. Okay, what does that mean? It means I get fined by the IRS when it does come to pay my taxes. It's some small percentage. But instead, what I do is I put that money in an account where I can grow the money faster than the fine that the IRS pays me. Now, you may think that's ridiculous, but it's been paying me very well. The IRS is happy because they get more money, and I'm happy because my money grows faster. Okay? Now, I don't risk it all on some appreciating asset hoping to strike it rich, but you can put your money very, very safely, even in today's environment, at 5-6%, which is more than the fine that the IRS would charge you. Okay, that's one idea. Another idea is to set up a trust, set up an LLC. Okay, if you buy a car and you have some business on the side that is using that car, you can write off some, if not all, of that. Now, a $30,000 car written off for taxes, I mean, you just saved yourself $10,000. Just think about that. Just with the LLC. Let's say it costs you $1,000 to set up the LLC with a good attorney and a good estate lawyer. Okay? Now you save $10,000 on your taxes. You're up $9,000. That's $9,000 for the kingdom. That's $9,000 for your abundance. That's $9,000 for you to do what you want to do with your provision that God gave you. Don't ever feel sorry for that because the IRS is taking a hit. Why? Because the people in charge do the same thing. That's why. The people in charge do the same thing. If there is some unjust tax law that the people get really upset about, guess what the politicians are going to do? They're not going to repeal it because they benefit and their donors benefit. So don't ever feel sorry for yourself or guilt yourself into giving more than you should. You give exactly the amount you should by law. That's it. Nothing more. Okay? There are ways for you to invest your money completely tax-free. All right? For example, if you have a life insurance plan, any money attached to a life insurance plan is completely tax-free. Okay? The growth is tax-free, and then when it passes on to your kids, it's also tax-free. That's what most of the really wealthy people in this country do. They insure their money with life insurance and then pass it on to their kids completely tax-free, so they don't have to pay a bunch of estate taxes and all this other stuff. All right, that's how the wealth stays in their family. That's how the Rockefellers have been doing it for generations. Okay? You can do that too, albeit on a lesser scale. Okay, there's other tax-free interests that you can buy. Tax-free bonds. Okay, bonds are finally yielding something after a long, long time. If you really think that's the best investment for you, there's tax-free bonds that you can buy that have good interest rates and that are backed by obviously the government, which, all things considered, do I really want to invest in the federal government for years and years? All right, it hasn't defaulted yet. It may in the future. But again, if that's what you think is the best way to grow your money, then go ahead because you can have it tax-free. All right, if you're a real estate investor and you have rental real estate in a trust under LLCs and it passes to your heirs, guess what? You get, in certain circumstances, you get what's called a step up in basis. Meaning, if your real estate was purchased years and years and years ago, they now say, well, it was basically gifted to you and now it's zero. In certain circumstances. Now, again, I'm not the attorney. Don't use that as financial advice. But again, I want you to get your mind thinking about ways that you can use the resource that you've been given to reduce the tax bill by law. Remember, this is all legal. I'm not telling you to go not pay your taxes and just break every law. I'm telling you, if the law says you can reduce your tax bill, then do it. It is your duty and your obligation as a believer to have as much resources in your pocket as possible. That's why. Okay? Don't ever, again, I want to leave you with this. Don't ever, 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 ever be guilted into giving more for taxes than you should. The government will find a way to fund itself with or without your money. They will. Okay? If you just, let's just say for the moment, I'm not saying you do this, don't do this, but if you just stop paying taxes right now, the government would not miss you. Even the largest contributor to the treasury, whoever that is, whoever many millions and millions and millions that they give to the government every year, if that person, whoever that is, stopped paying taxes, the government would not miss a beat. They wouldn't. Okay? So again, pay your taxes as little as possible by law. That's what I want to leave you with. Because again, the Bible tells us to have taxes paid. All right? Jesus paid taxes. He said to pay taxes. And the government, our governing authorities over us require resources to function, but they don't require everything to function. They require enough by law. Okay? And if the lawmakers don't like the law, they think it's cheap, then they will change it. But remember, they won't do that because they benefit from it. Okay? So again, in conclusion, we're going to say this. Pay as little taxes as possible by law. That's your duty as a believer. Do not pay any more. Do not pay any more than the law requires you to. Okay? That's going to allow you to have the great stewardship, to be able to have the open doors, to be able to have a larger economic territory, because that's what God is trusting you with right now, with your resources that you have now. Are you going to use them to the best of your abilities to grow His kingdom and live in abundance? Right now, you're not living in your abundance if you're giving all your money to the IRS and the Treasury. You're not. Okay? With that being said, I really hope you were blessed today. I really hope you understood this very, very well, that we pay our taxes, but we pay as little as possible by law. Okay? That's going to allow us to live that great financial abundance that God wants for you. Okay? With that being said, hope you have a very blessed day, and I'll talk to you again very, very soon.